Disney's Little Woman, featuring Mickey and friends. In a small country village, the March cousins lived with their grandma in their old house. Meg, the eldest, loved elegant clothes and dreamed of being able to afford some one day. Joe was incredibly determined and had a true passion for literature. Beth was a talented piano player, while lively Anne enjoyed painting. Grandma March loved their different personalities and hoped that they would always be happy and proud of themselves. Jo wanted to become a writer, but she knew that it was a difficult profession to get into, especially for women. When she wasn't helping her cousins and grandma, she spent hours writing stories, hoping that one day someone would publish them. Meg hoped to marry a nice man and have a quiet, happy life. A young gentleman named Mr. Brooke. He had already stolen her heart. He was working as a teacher for Laurie, the nephew of the March's wealthy neighborhood, Mr. Lawrence. Laurie was a good friend of the Marches. So he always invited them to the most important events in town. One night, Joe and Meg, wearing their best gowns, waited for him and Mr. Brooke to pick them up to go to the theater. "It's not fair. I want to go too," Amy complained. "You're not invited. Stop insisting," Joe said, making Amy even more upset. When Joe and Meg left, Amy rushed to the attic and tore Joe's precious writings into tiny pieces, taking her revenge. When Joe saw what happened to her pages, she gave Amy no choice but to sit down and glue all the pieces back together. Amy felt bad about what had happened and tried apologizing to Joe, but her cousin wouldn't listen. The next day, Laurie invited Joe to the lake to skate. Amy decided to follow them, but when she started skating, the ice broke, and Amy fell into the cold water. "Oh no, the ice is full of cracks," Laurie said when they heard Amy's cry for help. "Follow me," Joe said to him bravely, skating toward her cousin. It wasn't easy, but the two friends pulled Amy to safety. After Amy's accident, she and Joe started doing more things together. Besides playing the piano, Beth took care of other families in the neighborhood. Grandma March and the other cousins greatly admired her, so one day they decided to help her. Each of the girls found a different way to entertain the children, while Grandma baked her delicious apple pie. It was a real feast, and all the cousins were happy. Soon after that day, Mr. Brooke proposed to Meg, and she had never felt happier. The ring was a creative jewel made of wood and glass that Mr. Brooke had made himself. Meg thought it was beautiful and couldn't wait to marry him. That night, when everyone was asleep, Meg and Joe talked about their futures. Joe told her cousin that she would go to New York and try to have her stories published in a newspaper. It was the only way to make her dreams come true. "I'm sure you'll be a great writer," Grandma March told Joe. "You are determined and talented, but promise me that you'll be careful." "Don't worry, Gran. I can look after myself," Joe assured her. Some days later, Joe left on a horse-drawn buggy with her writings, a suitcase full of clothes, and her dreams, promising she'd return soon. After being in New York for a few days, Joe finally got an appointment with a famous publisher named Mr. Dashwood. She was quite nervous, but as determined as usual. Becoming a writer was her biggest dream, and she hoped to earn some money to help her family. An hour later, Joe left the office with a smile on her face. Mr. Dashwood liked her writing and had agreed to publish them. When she walked out, she accidentally bumped into a gentleman dropping all her papers in the street. The young man helped Joe pick them up, thinking she was really pretty. As soon as her first story was published, Joe sent the newspaper to Grandma March and her cousins. Everyone was proud of her. Joe was proud of her achievements, but the money she was earning was not much. When she wasn't writing, she worked as a nanny for a wealthy family. One morning, while she was playing with the youngest kid on the floor, the same gentleman she had bumped into on the street entered the room carrying a pile of books. When he recognized Joe, he tripped over his feet and dropped all his books. "I think I know you," Joe said, leaping up in surprise. "I'm Professor Bather, the new tutor. I'm sorry to intrude. Sometimes I'm a bit clumsy," he said, looking embarrassed. Joe helped him up to his feet, smiling at him and thinking what a sweet guy he was. Since they lived in the same house, Professor Bayer and Joe had the chance to get to know each other better. Joe even let him read her published stories, but he thought she should write a novel. Joe didn't hide her disappointment. Meanwhile, at home, Meg and Mr. Brooke were planning their wedding. It would be full of joy. Like Joe, Amy decided to leave Grandma and her cousins to travel with her rich Aunt Carol and Lori. During the journey, Amy would be able to practice her painting skills and try to become an artist. Meanwhile, Uncle Lawrence was feeling a bit lonely. Grandma had an idea to make both him and Beth happy. One day, she took Beth to his villa and asked him if Beth could play his beautiful grand piano. Mr. Lawrence decided to give Beth a chance. When she saw the grand piano, Beth couldn't believe she was allowed to play it. Beth sat down and started playing, filling the house with a beautiful melody. He was so delighted that he asked her to stay and play as much as she wanted. Beth played night and day, becoming lost in her music. She couldn't stop, making Grandma and Meg so worried that they sent letters to Joe and Amy to tell him about the situation. They say that Beth has been playing nonstop for almost a week now. A puzzled Amy told Lori when she received the letter. When Joe received Grandma's and Meg's letter, she asked Professor Bather to read it to her. "Dear Joe, only you can make Beth see reason. We are sorry to ruin your stay, but we think we need your help," he read. Joe had to leave immediately to help. Joe told Mr. Dashwood that she couldn't write for the newspaper anymore. Then she packed her things and ran to the train station, anxious to get to Beth, but also sad about leaving Professor Bayer. When they were saying goodbye at the station, he told her to keep writing, and Joe felt she was leaving a piece of her heart with him. Amy had the same thought as Joe. Beth was more important than anything else. Her behavior was too strange, so she decided to travel back home with Lori and Aunt Carol. When Amy and Joe got home, the situation had become even worse. Beth fell asleep on the piano 2 days ago and hasn't woken up since. Poor thing, she must have been so tired after all that playing, Meg explained. The cousins stared, bickering, trying to decide on the best way to wake Beth up. A good bucket of water never fails, Meg said. No way, we need some music, Joe objected, grabbing a trumpet. You're wrong. Only old Mr. Doodle-Doo will wake her, Amy said, holding the neighbor's rooster. Their arguing was so noisy that Beth suddenly opened her eyes. Joe, Amy, you guys are back, Beth exclaimed, happy to see her cousins. What happened? I must have gotten carried away while playing. The girls were so happy to hear her voice that they dropped everything and gave her a big hug. After that day, the March cousins understood that happiness didn't come only from their dreams, but also from love, family, and shared moments. When Professor Bather knocked on the March's door and told Joe that he had moved next door, she was overjoyed. Some months later, Meg and Mr. Brooke got married, and so did Lori and Amy. Beth kept playing piano and helping everyone. Joe finally started writing her first novel, Little Woman. She was sure that one day she would publish it, as did her family and friends. The end.